Y antes de venir, porque es canadiense, antes de llegar a Estados Unidos, Laura trabajó como programadora de varios canales de televisión, inclusive en uno lanzó un programa, el primer programa en Canadá específicamente enfocado en la mujer, televisión para la mujer. Ha ganado varios y numerosos premios y adicionalmente también es productora de cine y de cine y de documentales. Entre los cineastas a quien ha producido está nuestra grandiosa Isabela Rossellini. Laura ha venido acompañando a Isabela en el tributo, pero sí aprovecho para decir esto y después lo voy a traducir en inglés porque quiero que Laura me entienda. Ha sido completamente indispensable en que Isabela esté aquí. I'm thinking, because I'm just saying towards the end, that you have been absolutely indispensable and incredibly gracious in helping us have Isabela here. Con ustedes, Laura M.
Thank you. Thank you. This is the first time I've ever been to Cartagena, and it's beautiful. We came yesterday from New York, and I have to say, I've been to many festivals around the world and many markets and many, film events, and this is among my most favorites so far, and I've only been here 20 hours, so gracias. Thank you. Today what I want is to be able to speak to you about my experience. As Monica said, I am a programmer. I have run networks and programmed television networks in Canada and the US for the last 17 years. But I'm also a producer, and I've worked for a long time mixing television and film in terms of programming on a national stage. And I understand here in Colombia that you have two big networks, two major television networks, and then you have a film industry. And that the mixing of film and television, unlike maybe in the US where we've really kind of blown up, if you will, the models of film sits in one area, television in the other, we've worked very hard in the industry to actually merge the two in many ways and bring filmmakers to television, and then you have television makers, directors, producers, writers working in film. It's a very interesting time in the world with the internet, and we are at a cusp, I think, in our industry of understanding how the digital world is going to radically change, as it did in the music world. When MP3s, when iTunes was introduced over 10 years ago, it changed the model of how music was made, funded, created, and then distributed. And we're facing that now in both film and television. So I also want to say that I would love to take questions as well today. So maybe Monica and I can speak a little bit together. And if you have any questions, just raise your hand and I'll be happy to talk about, whatever you're interested in. Does that work?
Yeah, sure. Bueno, I do have one question to start, which is that we're all no voy a hablar en español, ¿verdad? No, en inglés, yeah. We're all very aware of the digital changes, both for television and also for cinema. And we talk about how the industry will be completely different in 5 years' time, 4 years' time. It seems to me that it's already there. We're already how do you see the timeline? I mean, how is it going to be next year, the next year,
Right.
In the following year?
It's interesting. It's already happened, frankly. I mean, in America, in the last 6 months, Google, who bought YouTube 2 years ago, announced that there will be 100 channels. This is just one example. 100 channels launched now between, they announced in October, and they are announcing 100 channels that are digital off YouTube, but they are like a television channel. So there's 100 of them, and they've granted them to various people. Jay-Z has one, Estelle has one. Then there are channels that are going to be oriented to lifestyle. So there's a women's channel, there's a babies channel, there's 3 or 4 fashion channels. I think Anna Wintour and Vogue are getting a channel, various magazines are getting channels, and then artists are getting channels. I've been speaking with Isabella Rossellini, who we're here with, and I said, you should have a Google YouTube channel, frankly. Because the idea of those channels is that artists, creators, whether you're a magazine, a producer, a filmmaker, or a television maker, can speak to an audience on a digital platform in a way that has been unavailable in the past on linear network, because we know how difficult it is You have 2 channels terrestrial in this country. We have, 7 or 8 terrestrial and then hundreds of digital channels in the US. And you know how hard it is to get those channels launched. They're very expensive. They take a lot of infrastructure. You spend millions and millions of dollars on programming. A channel, when it launches in the US, takes at least a minimum of 500 original hours every single year to run. So you can fathom, at Discovery, for instance, our big networks, Discovery, Animal Planet, TLC, they run anywhere from 500 to 700 new original hours every year. So that's, we were spending $1 billion a year on content at Discovery among 13 networks and then around the world for programming. So the digital age is going to allow every single person in this room, if you're a filmmaker, a producer, a writer, or a television producer, to launch content that doesn't have to go through a linear channel and could go through, for instance, one of these 100 YouTube channels, or a Hulu, or an Amazon. There are all these, or Netflix. There are all these ways for creators now to speak to audiences in a different platform. And it's happened. It's already happening in the US. I think the challenge is monetizing, and creating a revenue stream, and then creating production funds. And that's what people who, sitting in rooms like this room, all across America, are dealing with. If I'm a filmmaker and I need $1 million to make my independent film, what are the models for production that are going to allow me to make it and then stream it online, or sell it to television, or sell it to theatrical? That, we call it the Wild West. The Great Wild West is open again. It's a very complicated but actually invigorating time, because I sit in meetings with filmmakers and producers and writers, and we talk about where these projects should land. Is it for major television? Is it for cable? Does it go to HBO, for instance, or does it go to Showtime? Or is it a Netflix platform? The interesting thing is programmers like myself sit in all these companies. So the biggest challenge is actually getting to those creators, getting to the creative decision makers, to understand what their mandates are and to understand what works and what they're interested in. In the US, I would say nonfiction and documentary, reality television, has been the most, has succeeded in terms of reaching a wider audience, because it's less expensive to produce, nonfiction, documentary versus drama. So you see a lot of that kind of format launched on digital cable channels and then across the internet as well. Every little kid can grab a camera now and film his cats and put it on YouTube, and it's a hit. You have 10 million viewers in like 5 minutes. So it's an interesting time. It's an exciting time. And you have to have, I think, a lot of innovation, great ideas, and a lot of creativity.
Right, because it just feels so overwhelming. I mean, how do you get people to see you? Everything's out there in the internet. How do you get the attention? If you have the product, that's also, it's monetizing, but also,
Yeah, raising the funds. What we do typically is, you still have to start with great storytelling. And I say this because, I talk to a lot of producers and writers, and frankly, Isabella and I have spent a lot of time. I don't know if any of you were at her talk last night, and her films are being featured here, and it's a lovely tribute that you're doing for her. But we had this discussion 7 years ago when I started at Sundance Channel, when she came in and said, "Okay, I'm an actress, model." I'm like, we had met 12 years ago on a Guy Madden film that I helped fund. And she said to me, "I want to transition," and this is just a great story for understanding how she made that leap. She said, "I want to transition to be a director. I want to, make movies." And I said to her, "Okay, Isabella, the frank reality is making a feature film could take you 10 or 15 years. You're very talented. Obviously, you have the most incredible background." I said, "But there is this other opportunity." She had never seen films on, an iPhone, on a computer. I said, "There's other opportunity." I was at Sundance Channel. I said, "We're very interested in making content for the web." And I said, "You have an artist's kind of spirit and energy." And understanding what works on the web is it's just 2 to 3 minute pieces. It's hugely creative. It should be shocking, if not provocative. It should be in your original voice. It should be distinctly Isabella Rossellini, not anyone else. And I had known her, that she had interest in the environment, and she's a huge animal, you know, passionate animal lover, and has spent a lot of time, you know, with her seeing eye dog activity, spent a lot of time, you know, nurturing sort of the safety of animals. So I said to her, why don't you mix the artistry with your passion for animals, and then with a provocative kind of Rossellini take on the world, a creative artist take. So she went away, and I showed her little films on an iPhone, and we had, you know, the computer, and she came in and we gave her a demonstration, and she went away, and 5 or 6 weeks later she came back and said, I've come up with an idea, these short films around the sexual reproduction, the mating, and at that time she was doing insects, spider, fly, the worm, the snail, and she said, this is what's interesting to me. And she came in, and I still have them from 7 years ago, you know, she storyboarded each one, and each page, you know, was sort of a little bit of dialogue and then 4 or 5 frames. And she said, how do I take them off the page onto the screen? And that's when we helped her put a team together. And her first idea was, well, we'll do them in the living room at my home, you know, and we can shoot them and make them very innovative but very low budget. And we were able to give her more money. But just as an example, on the internet, a 1-minute film can be as cheap as $250, which is, you know, that's if someone's in their basement in their home. Or in the case of some of the shorts like Green Porno, they were about $20,000 to $25,000 for 3 minutes. Now, that's expensive for a short on the internet, but when you see the quality of them, and you see that they have, you know, in terms of art direction, there's a great, you know, incredible paper maker named Andy Byers who made all the insect, you know, all the paper, sort of they look like maquettes, and the staging, you know, which Rick has done. It's very kind of, it's almost mise en scene in terms of the way it's made. So those were $25,000 each, but what I said is they're going to bring great value because they drive an audience to the web, the SundanceChannel.com site, that will help us bring advertisers around the site. So what's interesting is we made I think she's made 27 or 28 of those Green Pornos and Seduce Me's, and they were the #1 short on the Sundance Channel site in the history of ever putting content on that site. So it brought great value because people came to the site, we had our schedule, we had our film program, we had our documentary lineup, and then they watched the short. So we sat and thought about the business model, frankly, in a way that I think you have to sort of open your mind. It's a hard, it does not come naturally, frankly. But in the meantime, when I moved over to Discovery in 2009, she said, I still want to do a longer form. I still want to do something that's more than 3 minutes at some point. So that's when we came up with Animals Distract Me, where I said, okay, let's combine the innovation of Green Porno and Seduce Me, and this whole, I was running a channel just until this past January, and then I'll give you a hint of what I'm doing next, because it's also another kind of mesh of my world, of this world. But she came to me in 2009 and said, I'd like to do a longer, maybe half-hour or hour, on animals and Darwin, because, you know, this is a passion. And so I said, okay, for Discovery, we don't buy shorts, we don't do 2-minute pieces, but we do 60s and we do 30s and we do series. So she came back with a proposal for Animals Distract Me. And again, in the US, on television, you're either doing a half-hour, or you're doing a multiple-part series, 6 hours, you know, 8 half hours. And the idea around that was, I said to her, it's going to have commercials, so you have to write for a network that's going to have, you know, 8 commercials in an hour, and have a story that dips into both the creative and the artistic, but also has an environmental message, because it was going on Planet Green, which was, you know, the environmental channel that I was president of. And again, you know, she did it on a budget that was, frankly, by television standards, quite high, you know, a couple $100,000, but it also was, we financed it, Discovery alone, because it was going all over the world. So it played on Discovery in the UK and in France and in Germany. And it's because of the fact that she combined both an environmental message and then an artist's message, and created something that was very entertaining. And, you know, she got a lot of reviews for it, you know, New York Times, LA Times. She traveled all over the world. It played in Berlin. It played, you know, in Toronto at the film festival. So it was a hybrid of, yes, it was made for television, but it also became a feature. Not a feature, but you could call it sort of featurette, because it was an hour. And some papers called it a documentary. Some papers, you know, some critics called it a sort of docu-fantasy. It's a hybrid. But what's interesting in that model is we combined sort of a traditional television funding to a feature film strategy, right? By taking it to festivals and having her appear around the world as an artist, as a filmmaker and writer and director. So that's a hybrid. And the next project she described last night, called Mamas, is likely going to be a series of shorts, but I'm encouraging her to consider them as a very commercial internet series because, you know, in the online world, women who have children are a big target because that's a very big population, frankly. And there's a lot of websites dedicated to mothers, and there's a lot of websites dedicated to women, whether it's fashion, health, beauty. So I said to her, that series, you can imagine it being financed through 3 or 4 sponsors or advertisers who will help, and you could then speak to that female audience, but it can also have that tongue-in-cheek, you know, very sort of artist creation. And we'll see, you know, as everyone experiences when you're making content, programming, it's a very tough model to figure out. But my theory is you have to start with a great idea. You have to start with an amazing creative story. You have to start with conviction, and you have to be able to explore all those avenues. Because I said to her, in a year's time, you don't know where it might land. It might be on Yahoo or YouTube or Hulu or iVillage, which is a female-oriented site in the US that, you know, really does cater to women, mothers, you know, fashion, beauty, health, business, women who are engaged. And we'll see. And she's, just like everyone in this room, experiencing the same challenges around how to get financing. But it's just, you have to be, I always say you have to be innovative, you have to be open, and you have to be very persistent. You have to be very persistent.
I have a couple questions regarding the financial part of the model. We say that green porno is quite successful, and that you recovered, you know, the cost through advertising, through a lot of advertising, so you can quantify that. So it's 2 questions. Number 1, do you think you could have charged for downloading her green porno?
In this world, yes. Now, at the time when we launched them in 2006, the download model, we had them on iTunes, but we made them free because we thought the advertising that would surround them help pay for giving them out to the public free. So if you go to SundanceChannel.com or you go to iTunes or you go to YouTube, they're available for free for the world. Some of the other series that we've worked on at Discovery, for instance, sometimes we would never allow them to go out on the internet. We said no, because what's important is that we have channels all around the world, and rather than making a series, you know, some of the biggest series that my colleagues created, Deadliest Catch, I don't know, do you get Discovery here in Colombia?
Yeah.
There must be, right?
Yeah.
At Discovery. Is it cable? Is it considered digital cable? So we decided, the strategy our CEO had for a very long time is we are not allowing any of those series to go out for free. So Dirty Jobs, Deadliest Catch, you know, those big Gold Rush, big iconic series, they're very expensive to make, they're very, very popular, they're very successful, and we didn't put them out online at all because the belief was the minute you put, you know, whether it's a feature, a documentary, or series online for free, you've just devalued it because you're not getting any revenue. But what we started to do was allow, it's called a paid subscription model, so that if you get an HBO in the US with, you know, $15 or $12 a month, I can't even remember how much it is, you can get something called HBO Go, which is a subscription internet access. So it's like you type in a code, and if you have an iPad, an iPhone, you know, your laptop, wherever you are in the world, you type in your code and you can watch those programs, but it's because you're paying that $12 a month. So that's a model that a lot of broadcasters, both cable, pay, and terrestrial, are following in the US, is saying we're going to allow our audiences to see our programming, but you have to be a member almost. You have to pay. It's like cable, yeah. You have to pay.
Online,
exactly, right. But online. Netflix is exactly that model. Netflix is very interesting. Do you have Netflix here? No.
Oh, online?
Yeah. So Netflix, you know, you can rent movies, documentaries.
But probably only the online part of Netflix.
Right. So, but Netflix is only online in the U.S. as well. You can get DVDs, which is how it started. So it was a DVD rental, right? You could pay $15 a month and then sign up and continually get DVDs as long as you sent them back and forth. Very successful, very successful. And then, you know, 7 years ago, they launched a digital model online as well, which is the same in the sense that You paid your monthly fee, you sign up with a code, and you now can stream on all your devices. Well, television has moved where you read Disney, Warner Brothers, Fox are doing deals with Netflix. And when you read that in the trades, what that means is they are going to them and saying, okay, we have 4,000 hours of content that we're going to make available. Netflix pays a fee to that company, whether it's Fox or Warner's or, Weinstein Brothers or the Miramaxes of the world. And a lot of independent film companies are doing deals with Netflix now because it allows them to take back catalog, feature films, documentaries that have been made over the last 50 years, and have a new audience. But frankly, as a filmmaker or producer, how are you getting that money? It is very hard because those rights are locked up with all these distributors who are going out and doing these deals with Netflix or Hulu or Yahoo or YouTube. And frankly, the filmmakers are not necessarily benefiting because those deals were long done and they weren't contemplated, right? Digital downloads were not contemplated 40, 50, 30 years ago even. So it's a tough time for filmmakers because often you made films if you are a senior filmmaker and didn't realize that this is what the world was going to be 35 years later. What's happening now is there's a lot of filmmakers who are saying, okay, I will make an independent film or I will make a television program. I will go to a major like Discovery or HBO, or I will go to Lifetime or a major network, but I will negotiate in that contract that even though they own a series or a special or a movie, that I get a back-end share on ancillary, which means when they sell to Netflix or they sell to all these platforms, the producer, filmmaker, directors are getting a cut of that. It's 2%, 3%, 5%, whatever you negotiate. And that's how revenue is now coming back to the creators, is by negotiating for those platforms that previously no one thought about. And there's a great filmmaker, I don't know if you know him, in the US, Morgan Spurlock, documentary filmmaker. He did Super Size Me, which was in America, a big documentary around, he kind of exposed McDonald's, and he went on a 30-day,
It showed here?
It showed here? Yeah, it probably did, right? 2004, 2003, 2004. And what Morgan did is he ate nothing but McDonald's for 30 days. And it was a social experiment, right? To see how would his body, after 30 days, how would his body be? And it wasn't even that it was about McDonald's, it was just about sort of like the fact that fast food in America has become, a daily diet for 90% of the population, and have we neglected the healthy side of eating? What happened with that film for Morgan is it sold all over the world. Was it a Miramax film in the end? I think it might have been, I can't remember. But that film, I think, was the start in the documentary world of something very interesting because it was so commercial, and he created little shorts because he had so much footage. So he created shorts that went viral online. So he did a lot of promotion for the doc. It showed in theaters and in cinemas all over the world. And then it sold to television. So he crossed this great line where, yes, it was a feature doc, but then it sold all over the world, not just theatrically, but on television, because it was a very commercial, viable property. Everyone wanted to see that film. It became a big phenomenon. And what happened for Morgan, and he's a friend and someone I really admire, is he was able to parlay that into all sorts of projects, both online and television and theatrical documentary making. He did a television series right after that called 30 Days. He won an Emmy for it. And it was, again, an idea of putting people into a situation like a social experiment. So he would, in 30 days, take a very, let's say, a family from rural America, from a farming community. He'd bring, 2 of the kids into New York City or LA and put those 2 kids in the LA or New York City world for 30 days, and then take 2 of the New York or LA kids and put them in the farm community for 30 days. So that was a very successful television series on FX. I think it ran for 3 or 4 seasons. He was making more documentaries, and most recently he struck a deal with Hulu, where he is making exclusive content for Hulu, half-hour, 15 and 10-minute series, where it's again in the documentary nonfiction format. And if you type in Morgan Spurlock online, you will see, the work that he's done. He's so prolific because what he's figured out is, I will make feature docs, I will make television series, and I will make web content. And he finances it all through these different sources. He's got a great team beside him and around him. He's got a good agent, a strong, relationship. But he can walk in a room and say to a television broadcaster, okay, I have the perfect series for you. Or if he's talking to a programmer who runs a digital site, he can say, I have a program for you. And then if he's pitching a theatrical doc to, a distribution company or financier, he's able to sort of compartmentalize and understand how each of these projects relates to the other and where they should belong. And that's I think what's happening in the world is, if you're a creator, you kind of have to keep all the possibilities open, frankly. I've had many filmmakers or producers come in and say, I have the perfect idea for a feature. And I'll listen to the pitch and I'll say, it's a great idea, but I actually think it's a more interesting 6-part, half-hour television series. Or in Isabella's case, you want to make a feature film, I suggest you make 6 2-minute shorts. It's just, the genesis of ideas are what starts the process, and who knows where they'll go. That's frankly, I think, one lesson for everyone, me included, is you just don't know where a good idea may end up and in what format.
It seems to me that it's quite clear that the internet has been, in terms of commerce, has benefited the public. You can choose as much as you want, and you can find the cheapest price. But in terms of content, it seems to me that so much ends up being overwhelming, and you might literally end up wasting your time watching things that you should have been watching much better time. You need a curator in the middle. So it's not necessarily the audience. Who do you think will be the best to benefit? Is it the filmmakers, the quote unquote distributors? Who's the one that you think will benefit the most?
Well, I think right now the democratization of the web, and that's a very good question, Monica, the democratization of the web has benefited audiences, us, right? Because you can get anything online. I think I would say right now, the biggest challenge is, there's all this research that says 18 to 35-year-olds, many of you in this room, probably aren't going to have a television set in 10 years. You're not going to get your content through the traditional, clicking onto your television. You're online, you're watching content on all these other devices. I think the biggest challenge is how are we paying for it? So right now the internet has been an amazing, tool for so much. I mean, for change, political, social, creative, artistic. The challenge is, how does that content get paid for? And that's what, those of us who work on the other side in programming and running, stations or networks, that's what we're struggling with, because we need to have, just like when you go to a movie and you're paying however, $10, $12, whatever the price of a film is, or you're buying cable and you're paying for the cable fee, that's how content gets paid for. And I think that's the big challenge. What you see now is a lot of the digital sites going into content because they've had such great success, whether it's Facebook, they just went public literally 6 weeks ago, and you see how they're valued at billions and billions of dollars. They're now announcing that they're going to go into content, and what Facebook wants to do is commission filmmakers and producers and content creators to make content, and they'll pay fair market value. I haven't had a conversation with Facebook around their strategy, but if I'm a filmmaker or a producer right now of content, I'm thinking of all those platforms, frankly. I'm trying to understand what they're looking for, and there's a saying in the internet, it's better to be first than perfect. And I think that contravenes sometimes the artist's process, where you want things to be perfect. Sometimes, and I think there's a lot of producers who've understood that in some ways, and Morgan's done that very well, Morgan Spurlock, he's gone out there and made content that, frankly, he was an innovator, and it was first. It's not that it's perfect, but it's, he's now onto his 17th project in 5 or 6 years versus waiting for that one feature. So it's complicated. I mean, I think we're just at the beginning of understanding all the impact of what the digital era and is going to mean.
Seems that the creativity right now is more what you do with it than exactly with the content of the content.
The good news is content. It's a cliche, but it's still true. Content is king. We need amazing content to play on all these platforms. And then you look at these television shows like American Idol or X Factor, and the fact that these shows have created stars that, frankly, they all, because of being on, or The Voice, these are amazing, well-produced, very expensive, big, reality contest shows. But those people, I was in New York on Wednesday, and I went to see a young artist named Dia Frampton, and this is a great example. She had been performing and had a record deal and was 5 years sort of, an independent singer. She'd done okay, but, not so great. Well, she went on The Voice after 5 or 6 years of trying really hard to make her career. She went on The Voice, and she became the runner-up last year. She became such a viral sensation because what the network did is released 3-minute clips of her performance online, so she became a huge internet sensation. And I saw her in concert on Wednesday night in New York, and the crowd, it was interesting to me. The crowd in there was like 18 to 30, maybe, year-olds. And I talked to a few of them, and I said, like, how did you know about Dia? They're like, oh, through the web. They hadn't bought her records in the past. They'd never heard of her from her, I think she was on Warner Brothers. She's now, I think, on Universal Republic. They'd heard that she was on The Voice, but frankly, they didn't even watch the television show. A lot of them had seen her 2- and 3-minute performances from The Voice online. And now she's selling millions of records, and most of them are coming, off, online. Most of them are downloads. Right. So it's kind of interesting, It really is the democratization, and I know a lot of artists who are now conceiving when they're doing work, film, television, they're sitting and thinking about their website and how are they, as they're creating a 1-hour or feature doc or feature film or a 6-part series, they're coming into me and going, here's my presentation of my website, and here's the digital strategy. And that to me is really clever. That's very smart to have that already, at the top of your mind when you're thinking of your project.